Okay, excellent. So, when Maastricht first asked me if I wanted to speak at this event, I had just wrapped up a 1.5 year long engagement with a team in a mid-stage startup. It was fun. It was engaging. We made a lot of progress. And I walked away marveling once again at the complex beasts that teams are. And when we ended up, I'm sorry. When I was talking with Moss about this, we were talking about how managing these beasts are a real challenge. But the thing I really wanted to get to was the complexity of managing those. And as I was looking for a central theme for this presentation around that complexity, the thing that kept coming up was the regularity with which I was forced to see the team differently. I was forced to approach the team differently, to have a different perspective. The ability to make those shifts, I believe, was the thing that was making all the difference. And it was during those times when I was unable to shift that things went less well. So here's the theme that I wanted to get to in this presentation. And that is the yes and strategy for effective and compassionate team leadership. The yes and in the strategy has been a pretty powerful tool for me to be more flexible and effective. But before we get to that, I want to back up a little bit and look at what is so complex about these complex teams. The thing I want to point out here is that it's the team that's complex, not the work that's being done. The work is actually merely complicated. And so has anybody here been introduced to the Cynefin framework? All right. So the idea here is that problems that you're going to address can be divided up into 4 types. You've got the clear or the simple. You've got the complicated. You've got the complex, and you've got the chaotic. And so complicated problems tend to have answers to the unknowns that are discoverable. It's a deterministic cause and effect. That is, you pretty much know in advance what result you're going to get when you take an action. Because the problem is deterministic, the process for getting to a solution is to sense, analyze, and respond. That is, gather information, analyze it, and take an action. In my father's generation, this is what they figured everything should be. You plan your work, and you work your plan. In the complicated problem space, you've got things like playing chess, taxes, and software development. On the complex side, answers to unknowns may require a crystal ball. You've got cause and effect, which is non-deterministic. While you can frequently trace the effect of the cause retrospectively, knowing what's going to happen in the future is almost impossible. As examples, you have war, economies, ecosystems, corporate cultures, and software teams. And so why are these teams so freaking complex? It's because teams are made of people, and people are complex. If you were one of those people who think that people are simple and easy to manage, I've got a 17-year-old I'd introduce you to. All right, so at the heart of it, software development is complex people in complex teams doing complicated work to serve a complex world. Now, folks, I have to say that for myself, this is exactly what makes software development so endlessly engaging and deeply challenging. And it is, in fact, the why of Agile. This is the reason for Agile methodologies. If it weren't for the complex people on complex teams meeting the needs of a complex world, software development would be a straight up complicated problem. We would simply do the analysis, the design, the coding, the testing, and we'd be done with it. It is the complexity all around it that's the problem. How does Agile manage the complexity? With iterations. We just saw that in the Cynefin framework, we've got probe, sense, respond. You do that repeatedly over and over again as you work the problem. We've got this sprint cycle of Scrum. Back in the 1950s, Edward Deming produced the Deming cycle, which is the plan, do, act, check. And so none of this is new. But the thing that I want to bring to it is this idea that as we go through these cycles, as we go through these cycles, you should make an effort to think outside the box. I'm sorry, I was hoping to have the presenter notes in front of me. Okay. So think outside the box. And one of the ways that I've had to make that easier is to ask myself, in whatever perspective I find myself, what are the other options? I use yes and. And so let's look at some examples. Let's take a look at psychological safety. And so for psychological safety, as leaders, one of the things that we're going to try to do is encourage folks to have inclusion safety. Inclusion safety is, do I feel like I am part of the group, or am I an outsider? We want there to be learner safety, which is, do I feel safe to admit the things I don't know and then publicly learn those things? Contributor safety. Do I feel like I can make a contribution and have that contribution be respectfully received? And challenger safety. Do I feel like I can challenge what's going on and not be shot down for? Now, can we agree that these are in fact good things for a team to have? And so the question becomes, how do we get there? And there's a role that leadership has in making this happen. The first is make it an explicit priority. Let the team know that we want this to happen, and it's important for the health, happiness, and performance of the team. Facilitate folks speaking up. Sometimes folks need help being heard. Establish norms for handling failures. You might put that in your team agreements. This is how we're going to handle failures. It's going to be okay to fail. If you're not failing, you're not learning. Create space for new ideas. Prep the team that there are going to be new ideas and they're going to pop up in the weirdest places, and how are we going to manage those when it happens? And embrace productive conflict. Productive conflict is a skill. It's a skill that leadership needs to have, and that leadership needs to be able to teach to the rest of the team. Yes, and the individuals on the team must take responsibility for building their sense of psychological safety. So we've got the leadership doing all this stuff, but it takes courage to develop psychological safety. You have to take risks. And at the end of the day, nobody can do it for you. This is you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink situation. And so you can lead the team to psychological safety, but at the end of the day, they are going to have to take risks to get the feedback to discover that they are in fact safe. Okay, radical candor. Who here has heard of radical candor? All right. So, Tim Scott's book, Radical Candor, is possibly the most important management book of the last 20 years. If you have not read this book, you should get a copy and read it. Unfortunately, a lot of people talk about radical candor and they've never read her book. And so let's cover some of the basics here. We're going to ignore all the other quadrants other than the radical candor for just a moment. The important point here is that radical candor is in that sweet spot between caring personally and challenging directly. And one of the things that points that Scott makes is that there is an enormous amount of relationship building that you have to do in order to demonstrate that you care for that individual so that they can receive the candor that you're providing. In fact, she says that radical candor gets measured not at the speaker's mouth, but the listener's ear. And so if you are not doing the work to build the relationship so that they can hear that you are actually trying to help them, then you are at risk of falling into the obnoxious aggression, at least from the standpoint of how the listener is getting it. Yes, and we live in an imperfect world, right? And so our managers won't always be able to build good relationships before providing feedback. The feedback we receive won't always feel to us like it comes from a place of caring personally. The feedback may not always be as direct as it should be, and we'll have to read between the lines. And so we have to take responsibility for doing the best we can with the feedback we receive in the way that we get it. And sometimes we're going to have to coach the people that we're leading, that we're working with, that that's the way it's going to have to be. All right, so that's the basics of it. Trying to see it from a different perspective, the yes and strategy for effective and compassionate team leadership. There are many other topics to talk about, and we don't have time for that right now. And that's it. That's me. And that's how to reach. Right.
Right.